Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today's video will have our analyst doing a dive into all of the patch changes coming in 10.8. There's a decent amount of changes with this patch, though the notable additions are a new champion and 2 new galaxies. Let's jump right into it, starting off with the new champion. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, back to the video. Patch 10.8 is an exciting patch for set 3 as it's introducing the first new champion to the set, Xerath. Xerath is a 5-cost Dark Star Sorcerer champion. There's a few interesting things that his addition brings. The most significant being a 5-cost Sorcerer, which adds another late game carry for that trait. Dark Star will also be a bit more flexible now, having an additional champion on top of a potentially reliable magic damage carry as a counterpart to the current Jin carry. Lastly, with another legendary champion in the pool, it makes finding a specific 5 cost a bit more difficult, as now there's a total of 7. Next up for the new stuff in 10.8 are 2 new galaxies. The first is the Trade Sector Galaxy, which gives players 1 free reroll each round. This will be quite an interesting galaxy, especially if the meta continues to be focused on slow rolling for 3-star champions. It may also help anyone on a loss streak be able to stabilize their composition earlier by having that 1 extra roll each round. And the other new one is the Super Dense Galaxy, which gives players a free Force of Nature upon reaching level 5. This sounds crazy and really shows their willingness to go wild with the galaxies. It's hard to say what this will do to the meta for the games where this galaxy spawns, but having an extra champion on everyone's board for free may speed up the game just a bit. That's it for the new additions to the patch, but let's dive into what's being changed, starting with system changes. An important change coming in 10.8 is the slight change to win and loss streaks. Max streaks are going from 4 wins or losses to 5 wins or losses to get that much desired 3 additional gold each round. This is a small change, so streaking is still going to be quite important, but it won't happen as early as it has been. Overall, it's a good change to try and reduce the reliance on streaking to do well, though it may not end up being enough. Another significant change coming in patch 10.8 is the modification to base stage damage and total damage of surviving units. The stage damage is going from 0, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 to 0, 0, 1, 2, 5, 10, 15. Basically, this makes the stage damage a bit less harsh throughout the game, but to make up for that change, they're increasing the damage of surviving champions. The damage of surviving champions is essentially being doubled for the first few stages, and later stages it's going from 8, 9, 10 to 13, 14, 15 damage. Overall, what this does is make the late game less punishing if you have a close round with only a few units left, and more punishing if more survive. It will also make open forwarding punishing, as you'll be taking extra damage from units earlier in the game. Another potential side effect may make players play more aggressive earlier in the game to punish anyone trying to be greedy. That's all for system changes. Let's move on to traits. Before we get into the balance changes, we should point out they're adding an extra tier for several traits in this patch. Blade Master, Dark Star, Infiltrator, Protector, Rebel, and Sorcerer are all getting 1 extra tier. Generally, this is done to future-proof a trait if they end up adding more champions to them, or for traits that have a spatula item. It likely won't affect balance much, since it's unrealistic to get most of them in a real game. The first trait balance we have is Celestial. The healing of Celestial is going from 15, 30, 60 to 15, 40, 65. It's not much of an increase for the 6P trait, but the 4 Celestial is getting a definite buff. This may bring about the potential of builds utilizing 4 Celestial as a late game splash trait. Moving on, we have nerfs coming to 6 Cybernetics. The health and damage bonus is going from 880 down to 750 and 75. It's a small decrease, so 6 Cybernetics will still be strong and may not dominate as much, since the nerf applies to all 6 Cybernetics, making it more potent than it looks like on paper. Next up are 2 nerfs to the mech pilot. The first nerf is more of a change to how the health of the super mech gets calculated. It's going from 100% of the pilot health to a base of 1800 and increased by 50% of the pilot's health. Basically, it's a slight buff to lower level super mech, but a nerf to the late level super mech when multiple mech pilots are level 3. The other nerf is an overall nerf, as the later star super mech is getting its spell damage reduced to 800, 1200 from 900, 1500. The earlier levels of the super mech will remain the same, same, and the max level super mech is still 5,000. But this does make it do less damage in the cases where the mech player is getting Annie 3 and Rumble 3. Space Pirate is getting a much needed buff to the 4-piece trait as the item drop chance is going up from 15% to 20%. It's unlikely that this will be enough to make Space Pirate playable late game, but any buff is a welcome one for this trait. And lastly, for the trait changes, we have a buff to 4 sorcerers. It doesn't seem like a huge buff, but the 4-piece trait is going up from 40% to 45% for the spell damage increase. While 5% isn't a ton, it is worth keeping in mind that this is a team-wide buff, so any increase will have quite the impact. It's worth noting that sorcerers have carved out a place in the meta for themselves, and this buff, while only 5%, may make them a must-have trait for some compositions. Moving on, we have champion balance changes. Caitlyn is once again receiving a buff, but this time it's to her ultimate's damage. The damage is being increased from 700, 1000, 1800 to 750, 1500, 3000. Across the board, this is a buff and may make Caitlyn a bit more appealing to play early and mid game. Next up is a buff to Xayah, as the attack speed her ultimate grants is being buffed from 75, 100% to 100, 125%. Xayah is already a fantastic early game item holder, so this buff may make her an even more worthwhile pickup in the early game. The last 1-cost champion being altered is Zoe. Her stun duration is going from 3 to 4 seconds when she's level 3. The damage of her bubble is also being increased to 200, 275 from 150 to 225 at levels 1 and 2. Good changes to Zoe since she's considered one of the weaker champions currently. Starting off, the 2-cost champions are 2 buffs to Annie. First, her armor is being upped to 45 from 35, and secondly, her ultimate shield is being increased from 225, 300, 450 to 270, 360, 540. Individually, the mech pilot champions are a bit lackluster, so this will hopefully make her more appealing outside of her mech trait. Darius is getting a small reduction to his mana pool, going from 70 to 60. This is hopefully going to allow him to cast more often in a fight and get the all-important dunks off. Lucian is being nerfed slightly, with his attack damage going down to 50 from 55. It's not a significant amount, but enough to bring him in line with some of the other 2-cost champions, as Lucian is definitely one of the stronger 2-costs. Next are several changes to Rakan. First is a change to how his ultimate targets, as it will now go to the furthest enemy within 3 hexes instead of the target he's attacking. It's hard to say what impact this will have on Rakan, though you can potentially manipulate where you wish his knockup to go more consistently. Alongside this change is a nerf to the radius of his knockup, as it's going from 2 to 1, which does lower his usefulness by a small margin. Lastly, Rakan is having his mana reduced from 150 to 100, which means he'll be able to cast much earlier and more often in a fight. Shen is getting a significant health buff, as it's going from 700 up to 800. This will make him a more reliable frontliner overall. Secondly, his 3-star ability is having its dodge increased from 4 seconds to 5, so he'll be slightly stronger if you 3-star him. Starting off the 3-star champions is a small attack damage nerf to Shaco, as it's going from 55 down to 50. His ultimate damage is being altered from 250, 325, 400% to 300, 325, 350%. Shaco will be a bit weaker with these changes, although his 1-star ultimate will do slightly more damage. Syndra is getting a buff to her auto range, as it's going from 660 to 890. This will make her less likely to run forward in fights and keep her safer in the backline. Kicking off the 4-cost champion changes, we have a buff and nerf to Fizz. First is a small health decrease going from 650 down to 600, and second is a buff to his attack speed going from 0.7 up to 0.8. These aren't vastly significant changes, though giving him less health does also nerf the super mech. Jinx is receiving a small buff to her base attack speed going from 0.7 to 0.75. This isn't a huge increase, but it will make her scale better with attack speed, which synergizes well with her ultimate. Soraka's getting more buffs in 10.8, with an increase to her health going from 650 to 700, and a buff to her healing, as it's being increased to 375, 550 from 350, 500. Overall, good changes, as he's still not quite up to par with other 4-cost champions. Next up is a much needed buff to Wukong, as his damage is going up to 300, 500, 4000 from 250, 450, 2000. It's not too big of an increase at levels 1 and 2, but enough to hopefully make him a more viable frontline CC tank. Lastly, for the 4-cost champions is a duration nerf to Vel'Koz's ultimate, as it's going from 2.5 down to 2 seconds. But on the upside, his targeting is being improved, as he will cast more efficiently on smaller groups of units. It's a worthy trade to give up 0.5 seconds on his ultimate to help him target better. And the last champion changes for 10.8 are 2 buffs to Aurelion Sol. Aurelion definitely fell off after being nerfed last patch, so he's getting some pep back in his step, with his health going up to 1100 from 950 and his armor being increased to 35 from 30. Whether this makes him viable again, we'll see, but he definitely needed needed these buffs. Alright, with champions done, let's move on to item changes. Up first is a buff to Chalice of Favor to now grant mana to the item holder. This is a welcome buff to an underwhelming item. Deathblade is receiving 2 changes as the starting stacks go down to 0 from 2, but the damage per stack is going up from 15 to 30. It's hard to say if this will be good for the item, as those 2 beginning stacks really helped this item out previously. Next, we have Frozen Heart getting attack speed slow increased to 50% from 40%. Not much needs to be said other than this hasn't been a priority item in set 3, and buffing it makes a lot of sense. Rapid Fire Cannon is getting an interesting change as the bonus range is going up from 100% to 200%. While this is quite an increase, it's hard to say what champions it will be applicable on, as most range carries had enough range with the 100% increase, and most set 3 melee carries don't often need the range increase. Next up is a buff to Shroud of Stillness, as the width of its effect is going from 1 hex to 1.5 hexes. This item can be quite useful in the right circumstances, so buffing it will hopefully increase the amount of players utilizing it. A large change coming in 10.8 is a nerf to the amount of mana a tier gives, as it's going from 20 down to 15. This will have quite the impact on champions that want to cast early and reduces the effectiveness of items made from one tier. Lastly, for items, we have Zeke's Herald. The range is being reduced from 2 hexes to 1 hex, so in total only 3 champions will be affected by the buff now. But to compensate, they're increasing the attack speed buff to 30% from 18%. This should make the item much more potent when played, as it not only gives more attack speed, but won't bait yourself into positioning around 5 hexes anymore. That's all for item changes, but before we're done, there's a miscellaneous change to go over. That change is that shields will now have 66% reduced effectiveness in overtime. This will match it to be the same as healing in overtime and reduces the chance of invincible poppies with infinite shields happening anymore. It's also a nerf to protectors, who are the most likely to be affected by this change. And that's going to be it for today's patch rundown video, folks. We hope you're excited for this new patch, especially with the new champion Xerath and the 2 new galaxies. Let us know in the comments section below what you're most excited for in 10.8. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying the content, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.